The Boston Celtics are one of the most historical franchises in NBA history, tied with the Los Angeles Lakers for the most championships in NBA history. The NBA wouldn't be what it is today without the Celtics. Yet the Celtics haven't won a championship in 15 years, and over the last few years have been overshadowed by the likes of the Bucks, the Heat, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their current star player, Jayson Tatum, has led the team to the Eastern Conference Finals 4 times in his short career, yet has only been able to eclipse the Eastern Conference once and make it to the NBA Finals. After a chaotic offseason in which the Celtics traded away the heart and soul of their team and recent Defensive Player of the Year in Marcus Smart, the question remains, can they finally make it back to the NBA Finals this year?
Obviously, we didn't achieve our goal. We didn't win, which was our goal. So we failed in that regard.
In news in the association, and it's all about Jaylen Brown and the Boston Celtics. They've agreed on a 5-year Supermax extension worth up to $304 million. That's according to multiple reports. By the way, it's the richest contract in NBA history. All that going to JB.
After original reports of a 3-team trade involving the Celtics, Clippers, and Wizards that would have landed Kristaps Porzingis in Boston, which fell through, the Clippers are out, but the Grizzlies now in. The teams are completing a 3-way deal that involves Boston and Memphis. It'll send Tyus Jones to Washington, but obviously the giant headline here regarding the best team in the East anyway to be involved in the deal is that Kristaps Porzingis is on the move, and now I can report Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart is heading to the Grizzlies. Wow, Stanford Steve, you said earlier tonight you thought they're going to have to move him. I said he's too valuable to trade. I didn't think that would happen.
We have some breaking Celtics news to report. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting the Celtics have acquired guard Jrue Holiday from the Blazers in a blockbuster deal 1 day before Media Day. The C's reportedly sending Portland Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and 2 first-round picks. Woj adding in the last few minutes that the expectation is that the Celtics are eager to retain Holiday long-term. He has a player option for next season.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to get right into things here today. Now, it did take a little bit longer than I would have liked to get to the Boston Celtics side of things from the Jrue Holiday trade perspective, and kind of what I think that they're going to get into coming into the regular season here this year. But we're finally diving into it. Make sure if you guys do enjoy, you guys drop a like, subscribe for more. And yeah, let's just get into things. So obviously, we know that this team is now comprised of really a big 4. Right, you've got Jayson Tatum as the head of the Hydra for this team. You've got Jaylen Brown as obviously the second guy, but they bring in Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday in the offseason in kind of 2 blockbuster moves that really shake this team up from what we've seen the last few seasons and kind of hopefully from this team's perspective set themselves up to try to make it back to the NBA Finals just like they were a couple years ago and potentially win their first finals with the duo of JB and JT. Now, I think obviously we're going to dive into the Porzingis trade. We'll dive into the Holiday trade. But the biggest thing here is depth. A lot of people are talking about how this team doesn't have a lot of depth, but I do think that that could be a little bit deceiving because obviously, like I said, you've got those main 4. Then it becomes the question of who starts alongside them. Is it Derek White or is it Al Horford? Those are kind of your next 2 guys if you were to tier it. And Derek White is an all-NBA level defender, and Al Horford is a veteran who is very, very good defensive big that at this point isn't the offensive player he was in the past where he was an all-star and such, but he has obviously been a staple of the Celtics roster for at this point, it feels like 10 years now, right? So that'll become the question there. Personally, I think that they're going to end up going with Derek White. Now, I want to say in preseason, they did start off with Porzingis and Horford, which leaves it very thin at the center position because beyond that, you really only have Luke Kornet as your next true center on the roster. You do have Neemias Queta on a 2-way center contract, but beyond that, there's not a lot of big man center play on this roster, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue because like I said, you have Al Horford and you have Porzingis. So as long as Mazzulla staggers their minutes, you should be fine for the most part. And then obviously throughout the regular season, you can get your Luke Kornet minutes and whatever. But especially when it comes to playoff time, Luke Kornet should probably not be touching the floor because that's just not going to help you win a ton of playoff games. As it goes for the rest of the rotation, though, they did just pay Peyton Pritchard. I believe he got a 3-year, $30 million deal from them. He ends up staying with this team after 3 years there prior, so we'll see if he lives up to that, second contract that he just got with them. But I do think he'll be a good bench option for them, provide some playmaking off the bench, provide some consistency, as obviously they just had a lot of roster shakeup. So hopefully he can kind of step into a bigger role now that, some of the other guys that were there ahead of him are gone. Mainly, I think you look at Marcus Smart being the biggest guard to depart from this team over the offseason. And obviously he's been a consistent part of the rotation the last few years. He showed stuff that they like, and hopefully he continues to progress for them as well, as, at this point, he's still a young player. The next guy that I would say is probably going to be a consistent guy for your rotation, looking at it right now, would be Sam Hauser. He fit well with the team last year, and I think he'll continue to do so this year. As it goes for the rest of it, you brought in guys like Delano Banton, who, funnily enough, I made a short about just regarding Raptors fans' obsession with him, but he really didn't do a ton in, Toronto, and so we'll see if Delano Banton's anything for him. Probably won't be. Again, to this point in his career, he's underperformed. You do have a guy like J.D. Davidson, who was very good in the G League last year for the Boston Celtics, so we'll see if he is able to kind of work his way out of a two-way contract onto more of a consistent basis with this team. You have a guy like Svi Mikhailuk, who's kind of bounced around a little bit at this point, but he has a potential to be a good shooter and is still young enough in this league. He's only been in the league for about 5 years at this point, and so he still has the potential to also develop into a guy that could get some minutes off the bench. Obviously not into like a starting role or anything like that. For the most part, we know what he is, but if he can get on a good shooting stretch, he could take up some minutes for you as well. And then Wayne Gabriel would be kind of the next guy that I would mention there before we get to the main three that I really want to talk about as your kind of last bunch fighting for those last minutes, especially when it comes to playoff time. Wayne Gabriel has bounced around. He showed very good defensive stuff. He has struggled a little bit on the offensive side. And so, again, just another spot, I guess, on his journey that we'll see if he can kind of provide an impact for. Beyond that, though, the next few guys I want to look at are Oshai Brissett, Lamar Stevens, and Jordan Walsh. First, I want to start with Oshai Brissett. Now, Oshai Brissett has actually had a pretty decent career up to this point. He's averaged over 10 points in his career. He, was a young player for the Pacers and obviously was drafted to Toronto initially, but once he got to Indiana, really started to progress his career. He's been able to shoot upwards of 42% from three on almost 4 attempts per game. So now that was a few seasons ago, and he's regressed a bit since, down to about 35-31% the last 2 seasons. Hopefully he can provide some outside shooting and some rebounding as kind of a 3-4 for you, and hopefully work his way into the rotation, as I do think he is the most likely to kind of soak up some minutes for this team just due to the success that he had initially in Indiana, and hopefully, furthering that success with even more better players around him, as Indiana's roster has been a little bit depleted the last few years, staying more on the younger side and, kind of sticking with your Buddy Hields and your Miles Turners and such, and kind of in that limbo stage of rebuilding, right? Then there's Lamar Stevens, who we saw play with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was hoped to, I think, be a better shooter than he was. He can play okay defense. Really, he's a guy that still hasn't unlocked a lot of his potential. He's just 25 years old, or he's just 26 years old. Oshai Brissett is 25 years old. So both these guys still in their mid-20s, still have the opportunity to kind of hit another gear. As for him, though, he's played a decent amount of games. He's played over 60 games the last 2 years in which he was in Cleveland. He averaged about 5 points per game. And again, just kind of a guy that you hope can kind of improve his outside shooting to fit a little bit more with the team. Because really that's what you need next to these guys. You've got a guy in Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum who are going to be heavy ball handlers. You've got a guy in Jrue Holiday who is probably going to hang his hat more on the defensive side of the ball this year. And then you've got a guy in Porzingis who arguably should have been an all-star last year when you look at his offensive stats. Plus he has the shot blocking ability up there with the best of them, that being 7'3", right? Now, health will be a concern, I think, for some of those guys, and we'll get into that here in a second. But I do think Lamar Stevens could be another potential guy to soak up some minutes off the bench. And then the last guy would be Jordan Walsh. Jordan Walsh is obviously their rookie this year. He comes in and is hoping that he can kind of provide an impact. He was a second-round pick, drafted 8th overall in the second round. And again, we'll kind of see what he can provide. He's a 3-4 that, has shown some good defensive potential, should be able to run in transition and just provide some youth for this team. Only 19 years old. He'll turn 20 here in a couple months. And yeah, I think this is a guy that should hopefully at least throughout the regular season work in and get some minutes with this team and play pretty well. He played pretty well in Summer League from what I remember. And yeah, so I like the way that he should potentially fit with this team as a backup and kind of as the young guy of the team, you know, kind of taking Peyton Pritchard's spot in that regard, because obviously, like I said, Pritchard's been in the league for a couple years, former first round pick. He himself is only 25, doesn't turn 26 until January. And so again, for Peyton Pritchard, I think you hope to see him just continue to have those good shooting numbers that he's had from three and hopefully improve that playmaking off the bench, as he struggled to really create a lot for others, at max averaging 2 assists per game so far in his career. But again, I think with more potential opportunities opening up for him and him being invested by the franchise into this offseason, he's a guy that I think you're looking at to hopefully kind of take a little bit of a step to help round out this roster. But enough with the depth. Let's talk about the top tier guys. Let's talk about the guys they bring in. Obviously, we know Jayson Tatum is at this point a top 10 player. He's an MVP level player. I've said that he probably could have put himself in MVP conversations last year. Obviously, he didn't. Now, could he easily do that this year? I do think it becomes a little bit more difficult to see Tatum be in an MVP conversation this season, just, you know, having such a conglomerate of guys that could be all-stars, because realistically, when you look at this team, it's nearly like the Atlanta Hawks team back when Al Horford played for them that could have like 4 all-stars, because Jrue Holiday, you know, he's going to have it defensively. I am sure his offensive production will drop off a little bit just by nature of playing with more shot creators, because when you look at what he was doing in Milwaukee, it was him, it was Giannis, and it was Chris Middleton that were really the shot creators. Here you're going to have JT, Jaylen Brown, and Chris Middleton. He's typically going to be the 4th guy on a night-to-night basis there, and so I do expect his offensive efficiency to go down, but I expect his offensive production, you know, points per game, potentially assists per game, to drop down a little bit. I do think he'll provide some stability at that point guard position, but again, this is a team that could have 4 all-stars, and that does draw away a little bit from a potential Jayson Tatum MVP campaign. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible, because if anybody should know about a guy going for an MVP while having 3 other guys averaging 15 to 20 points per game, it's a Nuggets fan with Nikola Jokic, because we've seen Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, and Michael Porter Jr. all make cases to be all-stars, along with Jokic going on to win an MVP. So, not to take away, Jayson Tatum has it on the defensive side. He's going to have it on the offensive side. And if he does put himself in MVP conversation, don't be shocked, because the Celtics are going to be good this year. And that's going to help his case even more, especially without him having an award. And with it kind of being up in the air after Embiid finally getting his, Jokic having his 2, Giannis having his 2, and, you know, the rest of the guys being a little bit older, whether it be a Kevin Durant, a LeBron James, even an Anthony Davis, who is, you know, a little bit health concerned, or Kevin Durant at that point, right? So Tatum himself could insert himself into the MVP conversations. I think Luka is another big candidate for that. And we'll just kind of have to see if these guys make a push for their first MVP. Next to Tatum, though, is his guy. He's been there for years now, 27 years old, Jaylen Brown. Just got a massive deal over the summer. He'll be getting paid over $60 million here in like 5 seasons. But he's worth it. You had to pay him. It makes sense. And really, this team kind of showed that they're going to go all in on these 2, especially this season, because Holiday does have a player option coming up here following this season. And then Kristaps Porzingis' contract runs for another 3 years. So this is kind of an all-in go here for this team. They're really investing in Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum to try to bring them home yet another championship and set themselves above the rest of the league with the most championships like they had back in 2008. Now, this team, like I said in the intro, hasn't made the NBA or hasn't won the NBA Finals since that 08 championship with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, etc. So they do hope to kind of seek that success again. Obviously, their closest reach of that in, you know, recent memory would be when Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown took them to the NBA Finals and did lose to Steph Curry. Now, they've shown that they can make the finals. They've shown, obviously, that they can make the Eastern Conference Finals. They've been doing it since Jayson Tatum was a rookie. Now it comes down, can these 2 get them over the hump? And if not, just because Jaylen Brown signed that extension, there's a possibility that next offseason he potentially gets in trade rumors again. There's a possibility next year he requests a trade. there's a possibility in 2 years. We've seen it with guys being on longer contracts. It's more common for guys to request trades. And if that does happen, if you're Boston, or if you do look at it and say, we don't think that these two can win it for us, you're going to get a lot of value out of him, and you're still going to have Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday next to Jayson Tatum to help you compete for a championship. Now, that's not to hate on Jaylen Brown. I do think that he's going to be very good for this team. I think he's going to be an all-star this year, and I think him and Jayson Tatum could get it done for this team, but it's not going to be easy because you're going to have just as much pressure as anybody in the league on you, which I think as of recently, we've kind of been putting that pressure solely on the Bucks, and though the Bucks have made strides to essentially potentially assert themselves above the rest of the league, and the Nuggets won it last year, and the Lakers will always have their talk, the Celtics are right there as really a top 4 when you're talking to people about who they think could win the championship, and a lot of people have this team as the favorites, in large part because of the duo of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, the additions. Kristaps Porzingis, like I said, arguably could have been an all-star last year. He had a phenomenal year while playing for the Washington Wizards. It might have been the best year of his career. He averaged the most points he had of his career or since back in New York when he was a one-time all-star at 22 years old. You have to remember, before he tore his ACL, he was on pace to become one of the best players in the league. Tears his ACL, struggles in Dallas, eventually gets moved to Washington in the it was not in the Russell Westbrook deal. I wanted to say that deal, but eventually he gets moved to Washington. Plays about half a season there. His averages up, his percentages go up. Then he gets a full season this last year with plays 65 games, almost the most games he's played in his career. It's up there with the likes of when he was a rookie or a sophomore. And so his health seemed to come back a little bit better. He seemed to be able to score the ball a little bit better. His defense was there, averaging a block and a half per game and a steal per game. And again, the rebounding is always going to be there. He's 7'3". He was able to get 8 rebounds per game. I think if he can be your full-time center for this team, it opens up a ton in the pick and roll game, in the pick and pop game, even isolating for him as a center on the low block. He's 27 years old and he fits the timeline perfectly. Him and Jaylen Brown are the same age, and they're only a year or two older than Jayson Tatum. So again, I think he's a perfect timeline fit for this team, and I think that, the fact that he can provide that as a shot blocker to be one of the best shot blockers in the league is something you didn't necessarily have, because although Robert Williams was a fantastic defender, he was a little bit undersized at 6'9". Al Horford's about 6'10". So you didn't have a true 7-footer on this team, and you completely replaced that with a guy that's 7'2", 7'3", one of the tallest guys to ever even play in the NBA, let alone be one of the tallest guys to be playing currently. Then you bring in Jrue Holiday. And so obviously you secured the interior defense with Kristaps Porzingis. You already had Al Horford, even if there are injury concerns between the two of them. Hopefully one of them is always healthy. Then you kind of looked at, okay, we lost Marcus Smart. Going out and getting Kristaps Porzingis, how can we replace that production? Personally, I've said this for a couple years. I've said it since it happened. I thought Robert Williams deserved the Defensive Player of the Year over Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart gets it and becomes one of the few guards in NBA history to do it. So that's a lot of pressure to replace that. So what do? You go get the guy that might be the only better guard defender in the entire league than Marcus Smart in Jrue Holiday. Now you get him as a byproduct of obviously the Bucks getting Dame not going to the Heat, and all that fiasco that goes on. The Bucks maybe might have overlooked the fact that who would be the number one suitor for the guy that they had to let go to get Damian Lillard and Jrue Holiday? None other than their biggest competitor at this point in the Boston Celtics. So he goes to the Celtics. They get him on kind of relatively cheap deal. Now you traded away a couple first round picks, but nothing too meaningful from a Celtics perspective. Now very good for the Blazers. And if you guys do want to see my thoughts on that, I will link the video up above on the right, which you guys can always go watch, in which we kind of detail how I think Scoot and them will do this season. But obviously from the Celtics perspective, you trade away a couple picks. You still have a ton of picks. Most of your picks are still there. And yeah, you traded away Robert Williams, but you already brought in Porzingis, so it's not too much of a worry there. Really great trade all around. You replaced the biggest need that you had, and now this team looks to probably be the best defensive team in the league, because behind the likes of Jrue Holiday and Derek White, I think you have the best defensive backcourt in the league. And then with Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, and Porzingis, that's probably the best defensive frontcourt in the league. So along with a guy like Al Horford off the bench, and even a guy like Ochai Brissett or Delano Banton or even Luke Cornett, you have some other guys that might be able to sub in and still keep that defensive consistency, or a young guy like Jordan Walsh. So we'll see how this team pans out. I would project them to be the best defensive team in the league. And if you want to try to stop Giannis and get out of the East, and you want to try to stop Damian Lillard and get out of the East, who I think are going to be your biggest competitors, you might have the two best guys to do it. Jrue Holiday, you don't want anybody more than him on a guy like Damian Lillard potentially. And if you want to throw bodies at Giannis, you have plenty of guys in Porzingis, in Tatum, and in Al Horford, who obviously Celtics fans, I think, overrate as a Giannis stopper, but he did have a good 1 year where he pretty much completely shut down Giannis. Now that was years ago at this point, and Horford is nearing 40, then at that point he was closer to 30. So obviously not exactly the fastest on his feet, but still one of the most high IQ players that there is in the league. So the Celtics set themselves up to, if not make the NBA Finals, be right there back in the Eastern Conference Finals, fighting against by far the most dynamic duo that we've seen over the last few years be assembled in Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. If I had to put a prediction on this team, I think they're going to be probably a 60-win team, and Jayson Tatum is probably going to be top 5 in MVP conversations, and this team is going to be the best defensive team in the league. If they win the NBA championship, I'd say that's hard to predict. I wouldn't pick them for it. They would probably be in my top 5, top 6 for sure, that I would say could potentially go. And if we're talking about coming out of the East, they're number 2 for me right now, only behind the likes of the Milwaukee Bucks. So we'll have to see what the Boston Celtics can do this season. I'm really excited to see what they do. And again, I think this team's just going to be fun to watch, especially if you like watching defense, you're going to like to watch the Boston Celtics. So if you're a Celtics fan, now is a good time to get excited, because this might be the best chance you've had to win a championship since you had Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. And yeah, I'll catch you all next time. Peace out, guys.
You know how to tie a tie now?
And you do that twice. And that play the job beforehand.
Honestly, no. And it's wild because I was in a web design class. We had to make a YouTube account and post videos. Now that video has millions of views.
It has so many views.
But the internet finds everything.